Coming up on New Day at Arirang, South Korea is expected to see a huge jump in new COVID-19 infections Wednesday with over 205,000 cases. Amid the surge, students return to their classrooms, some virtual, some in person, depending on their respective schools. At least 20 people have died after Russia attacked Ukraine's main cities of Kyiv and Kharkiv. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke to his Ukrainian counterpart over the phone to discuss sanctions against Russia and military assistance to Ukraine. And the International Energy Agency agreed to release 60 million barrels of oil from their emergency reserves to send a unified and strong message to global oil markets that there will be no shortfall in supplies due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Hello and welcome to this Wednesday edition of New Day at Arirang. I'm Mark Broom. Thank you ever so much for joining us.
And I'm Kim Mo-gyan. It's 8 a.m. in Seoul, Korea on March 2nd. And over the next hour, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and the world.
We certainly will. So we're going to begin with the COVID-19 situation here in South Korea. It's getting worse by the day, it seems. The country has now seen more than 3.2 million infections since the pandemic reached these shores, and today's daily tally is expected to soar past 200,000 new cases for the very first time.
For more on this, we have our reporter Kim Bo-kyung here in the studio with us. Good morning, Bo-kyung.
Good morning.
So let's start with the local infections. How many cases are we expecting for today?
Well, we're expecting to see a daily tally well above 200,000 mark because as of 9 p.m. Tuesday, South Korea reported 204,960 new infections. That is 71,043 more than for the same period the previous day. This is also a fresh high up from the previous record from February 23rd, which saw 171,451 infections. In the following days, we saw the daily tally stay between 160 to 170,000, but numbers dropped to around the 130,000 mark on Monday and Tuesday due to the so-called weekend effect. Although the daily tally for Tuesday was around 138,000, the ratio of positive tests went over 40% for the first time, further proof of how fast the Omicron variant is spreading across the country.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more cases of Omicron actually within Arirang TV at this point. It seems lots and lots of people are now contracting it. And the numbers are expected to go up even further in the days and weeks to come. How are health authorities here in South Korea evaluating the situation?
Well, Mark, according to health authorities, researchers from both here and abroad have predicted that the daily number of new cases will be more than 230,000 by March 9th, the day of the presidential election, while they expect the number of hospitalized critical patients to be more than 1,200. Authorities added the peak will be from early to mid-March, and infections could reach as high as 350,000.
Well, Bo-kyung, given the surge, parents with young children are expressing concerns these days because the beginning of the new semester starts today, right?
That's right. The new semester for most of the schools is scheduled to start today, and the Education Ministry has previously recommended that schools nationwide provide full in-person classes with the guideline of shifting to full remote learning if 3% of students test positive or 15% go into self-quarantine due to infection or close contact with confirmed cases. However, with the recent surge in mind, the ministry has allowed a 2-week grace period from March 2nd to 11th, so schools themselves can decide whether to give lessons in person or online during that time. During the spring semester, schools will not penalize students for COVID-19 related absences and will require students to submit COVID-19 test results or confirmation documents from medical institutions if they cannot take midterm or final exams. The ministry's guidelines recommend students take 2 rapid antigen tests a week and are providing 60.5 million rapid antigen testing kits for 6.92 million students and staff at kindergartens and elementary, middle, and high schools. They are to use a self-diagnosis mobile app to record and share their health condition and test results with schools, but it is not mandatory. Meanwhile, starting on the 14th, even unvaccinated students living with a person confirmed to have contracted COVID-19 will be allowed to attend in-person classes. Currently, only vaccinated students can go to school, while the unvaccinated have to stay home for 7 days in this situation. While the rule has changed, students living with someone who is infected are recommended to take a PCR test within 3 days of their cohabitants' positive result and a rapid antigen test on the 6th or 7th day.
Right, so Tuesday, March 1st, was a national holiday here in Korea. It was also the first day that vaccine passes were no longer required to gain access to a whole number of public venues such as bars and restaurants.
That's right. The government suspended the enforcement of vaccine pass system starting Tuesday in 11 types of public facilities, including restaurants and cafes. Though business owners said the removal of the vaccine pass system would not have a big impact on an increase in sales, as there is still a cap on the number of visitors per group and a 10 p.m. curfew, they welcome the change as less hassle for staff and customers. However, experts have criticized removing the visit record system, saying it has been done too early given that the Omicron variant is spreading fast.
There are some who do not know that they don't have to use their vaccine pass, but as time goes by, people will come in comfortably and have a meal.
It is quite concerning that lifting the measure could burden medical staff and health facilities while the country is going toward the peak of the pandemic.
Well, there seem to be different opinions on this, but let's just hope the removal of the vaccine pass doesn't boost new infections. Thank you so much for your report, Pok-young.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Now, moving on. In Europe, the UK's health ministry says it will lift its vaccine mandate for frontline medical staff and care workers in nursing homes.
The mandate will be lifted on March 15th, in less than 2 weeks from now. It comes nearly a year after the UK required all frontline medical staff in the National Health Service to be vaccinated. In February, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced the lifting of all COVID-19 restrictions in England, including the wearing of face masks and mandatory self-quarantine for confirmed patients, vaccinated or not. Russian forces have been targeting cities across Ukraine, including the capital, on day 6 of Moscow's invasion. As the fighting intensifies, the death toll is mounting, but diplomacy is still being attempted, with a second round of talks planned between Russia and Ukraine. Ji-young has more.
On the 6th day of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russian forces hit the cities of Kyiv and Kharkiv. Some Ukrainian TV channels reportedly dropped off air after Russia struck Kyiv's main TV tower as Moscow attacked civilian areas in what is being seen as a bid to demoralize Ukrainian resistance. The cultural heart of Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, was also struck by missiles and rockets. In the city's landmark Freedom Square, an opera house, concert hall, and government offices were bombed, causing a huge fireball that blew out the windows of nearby buildings. Residents claimed they were purposely being shelled by Russian forces.
They bombed the residential building, hit it with the rockets. Many civilians died. I have videos of at least 4 dead people lying on the ground. The dead person is lying next to us.
Local officials say at least 20 people died during Tuesday's attack on the northeastern city of Kharkiv. The UN Human Rights Office says at least 136 Ukrainian civilians have been killed since Russia started its assault on Ukraine, but estimates vary depending on the source. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia's bombardment of his country should stop.
We are for dialogue. Yes, but the least that must happen is the bombardment of people must stop. You simply have to stop the bombardment and then sit down behind the table for talks.
Russia's TASS news agency, quoting a source on the Russian side Tuesday, reports that a second round of Russia-Ukraine talks is planned for Wednesday. The first round of talks on Monday lasted about 5 hours but did not produce any tangible results. On Tuesday, U.S. President Joe Biden held another phone conversation with President Zelensky discussing Washington's economic and security support as well as humanitarian aid to Kyiv. 엄지영, Arirang News.
South Korea's senior diplomat has made it clear that Seoul condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Speaking at the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva Tuesday, Second Vice Foreign Minister Choi Jong-moon described Russia's invasion, quote, a clear violation of the UN Charter. Choi stressed that violence on innocent people can never be justified and called for swift humanitarian aid to be given to Ukraine. He also called for the international community's continued engagement with North Korea to tackle the North Korean people's abysmal human rights conditions.
Members of the International Energy Agency, including the US, Germany and France, have agreed to tap into their strategic crude reserves, pledging to release 60 million barrels of oil. The coordinated action comes as oil prices have surged to their highest point since 2014. As the Russia-Ukraine conflict continues. Kim Hyo-sun with this report.
31 member countries of the International Energy Agency have agreed to release 60 million barrels of oil from their strategic reserves. That includes 30 million barrels from the U.S. alone. The agency claims this will send a strong message to oil markets that there will be no shortfall in supplies resulting from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, this is equivalent to less than a single day of global oil consumption. The IEA, which includes the US, Germany, Japan, and Canada, holds 1.5 billion barrels of emergency stockpiles. This is the fourth time in history that the agency has engaged in coordinated action since the reserves were established in the wake of the Arab oil embargo in 1974. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the move is another example of how partners around the world are condemning Russia's invasion and how they are working together to address the impact of President Putin's war. Despite such measures, oil prices surged 7% on Tuesday to their highest level since 2014. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude rose 8%, topping $103. This is its highest close since July 2014 and the biggest daily percentage gain since November 2020. Brent futures also jumped more than 7% to settle at nearly $105 a barrel, their highest close since August 2014. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Last week, the Bank of Korea projected South Korea's gross domestic product to grow by 3% this year and 2.5% in 2023. It said the South Korean economy is forecast to continue its sound growth, supported by the reopening of global economic activities and the easing of domestic social distancing measures, despite rising internal and external uncertainties.
And on the same day, the BOK froze the benchmark interest rate at 1.25% after two back-to-back hikes. On the rate decision, the central bank's policymakers were unanimous. For more, we connect to Oh Jun-seok, professor of economics at Sookmyung Women's University School of Business. Good morning, Professor.
Morning.
So at 1.25%, the BOK has brought the benchmark interest rate back to the level it was pre-pandemic. Do you think this suggests the central bank believes the economy is still largely out of the woods when it comes to COVID-19?
Not exactly. I think Korean economy is still struggling to get out. The Monetary Policy Board announced to hold the interest rate steady, citing Russia's invasion, COVID-19 pandemic, and inflation. One of the major reasons hidden would be political considerations. So I suppose the Bank of Korea tried to hold this rate as possible until May, before the new president takes office. Bank of Korea forecasts consumer price to rise 3.1% in 2022 from 2.5 previous forecast. Global supply bottleneck and price rise in energy and raw material due to Russian military action push Korea's inflation higher than that of last year. Careful adjustment of the rates would be needed since inflation is projected to continue in 2022. As is in the transition period of COVID-19 pandemic, Korean economy is forecast to continue its sound growth, supported by reopening of global economic activity and ease of social distancing rules.
Right. At last week's meeting, the governor of the Bank of Korea dismissed concerns about stagflation. I know you've mentioned it numerous times when we have our conversations. He is saying growth is solid, exports are doing well, and domestic consumption is pretty much fine. Where do you stand in regards to the governor's assessment that Korea isn't set to enter some kind of period of stagflation?
Stagflation is a situation of stagnant growth with high inflation. So for the short term, I think differently. Not to mention of high inflation, there are many risk factors, imminent signs of stagflation. Export market outlook seems great, mainly due to Russian-Ukraine military tension. As Korea made it clear, participating in economic sanction, Washington is expected to demand Korea restrict its export of key industrial items to Russia, called foreign direct product rule. Under this measure, Korean companies in the semiconductor, automotive, and electronic appliance industry would find themselves unable to ship product to Russia. Secondly, financial volatility in the foreign exchange market will be another burden for Korea to tackle it. The U.S. put financial sanctions in place against Russian banks. China will support Russia by international trade, providing items blocked by U.S. Depending on the response of the U.S., the Chinese yuan would be projected to be volatile, closely linked with production cost of Korean companies. There is every reason that Korea should manage the risk factors, stagflation, at least for the time being.
But Professor, when it comes to the interest rate decision, do you think the BOK policymakers paid much heed to the fact that there's a presidential election coming up in a week, or do they generally avoid taking political matters into consideration?
In short, they do take the presidential election into account. Two major things to be considered in their interest rate decision. First one is political consideration. Interest rate change would be one of the most powerful instruments in the market. When it comes to the matter of how to use it, it would be much better for the BOK to save this powerful tool for the next government. Lest there happens urgent economic shock due to overall changes, the reference rate of 1.25% would be kept highly likely until May. Secondly, finance theory tells the future. The pace of U.S. Fed rate change might be material factors when the Bank of Korea makes its monetary policy decision. There is a significant relationship between foreign exchange rate difference between two countries and interest rate gap between two countries. In a way to stabilize the exchange rate fluctuations, the BOK should keep pace with the Fed rate changes. As long as the Fed rate hold its status, the BOK afford to hold the interest rate steady. This pace control process is also a part of political negotiations.
Yeah, well, the Fed have been indicating that they will start tapering their bond buying program in the coming weeks and months. So we're going to have to see how the Bank of Korea reacts to that. In regards to the growth forecast put out there by South Korea's central bank, 3% this year, 2.5% in 2023. Do you share the Bank of Korea's semi-optimistic view that the economy is generally heading in the right direction over the next couple of years or so?
You got the point. Semi-optimistic. Yes, I believe Korean economy keeps on sound and stable growth about 3% because Korean industry has successfully transferred into the advanced digital transformation, especially in the sector of entertainment, game, film, and K-culture, creating new source of growing momentum. What is needed now for Korea to continue its performance? Two things. First, supply chain resilience is the top priority. Upstream urban industry, raw materials and component sectors are composed of mainly of small and medium companies, very fragile to the shock. Once the supply chain has disrupted due to irreversibility, it is very hard to restore the chain. As a cushion for a business shock, there could be a necessity for a government to store a relief fund or support financing for sustaining supply chain operation in preparation for the situation. Secondly, resource and energy diplomacy may be an inflection point for another Korean trade policy. Now is the right time to make an economic partnership with Middle East countries in a way to stabilize the source of energy, to deliver business, to diversify business opportunity in the Middle East areas.
All right, Professor Oh, thank you so much for your insights. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. With exactly a week to go until South Korea's March 9th presidential election, the four main candidates go toe-to-toe again on Wednesday evening for what will likely be their last debate. Taking to the stage will be Lee Jae-myung of the ruling Democratic Party, Yoon Suk-yeol of the main opposition People Power Party, Shim Sang-jung of the Justice Party and An Chol-soo of the People's Party. They are expected to debate a range of societal issues with welfare, the country's chronically low birth rate, the national pension system and reforming investigative agencies likely to be front and centre. Tonight's debate, which starts at 8 p.m. Korea time, holds extra significance as it could be what sways undecided voters, a group that many watchers believe hold the key to deciding the outcome of the election. Wednesday evening's debate comes ahead of early voting on Friday and Saturday.
And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Morgan. It is indeed time for Global Insight. As the war in Ukraine continues, Russian missiles and rockets struck Ukraine's second largest city, killing at least 10 people and injuring 35 more. The impact of war has been devastating enough already. Russian forces have been bombarding residential areas. The number of people fleeing Ukraine has surged to more than 500,000, and at least 102 civilians have been killed since Moscow's troops entered the country, according to the United Nations. Today, we discuss the ongoing war in its sixth day. And for this, we connect with Carrie Odman, political scientist and political communications strategist, and Joseph Bosco, former China country director for the Secretary of Defense and opinion contributor to The Hill. Thank you both for joining us today. And well, let's start with you, Carrie, there in Frankfurt. Now, throughout this six-day war now, the resilience of the Ukrainian people, it's been remarkable to watch. And they've been living with a Russian-backed assault lingering on their doorsteps for years and years, of course, since 2014, as you said previously. But now any semblance of normalcy seems to be gone with this war. And, well, what is the current reality now for Ukrainians in the country?
I think it's important that you mentioned that the conflict has been going on and there's been tension since 2014. Ukrainians are accustomed to a certain amount of pressure from Russia for many years. And the difference now is that it is everyone's worst nightmare coming true. There was much speculation in December, January, even going back to the spring of 2021, where the troops started amassing on Ukraine's border, about what was actually going to happen. And until the bombs actually started dropping, no one thought that the Kremlin and Vladimir Putin would take it this far. Now, of course, the resilience of Ukrainians is something very, very admirable, but at what cost for their future and for Europe? And I think it's important to note that this is going to affect Ukrainian society for years to come.
And now, Mr. Bosco, well, there's been quite a lot of talk about, well, there's a lot of quoting Clausewitz and the strategy when it comes to war and how wars always are, well, wars tend to be a continuation of policy, really bringing many people to wonder what Mr. Putin's objectives really are for this war with Ukraine. So what do you think It really is. What do you think his intentions are? And is he in for a long war? I mean, how far is he going to go to carry this war into its conclusion?
Is that question for me, So-Young?
Yes, that's for you.
Yeah, I think Putin's objectives are much longer term and farther in scope than people have been willing to acknowledge. He once said that the demise of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster in the 20th century. And he intends to reconstitute the Soviet Union under perhaps a different name. But he's after not just Ukraine, but Georgia, which he invaded in 2005, and the adjoining country, the Baltics, and other countries that were once part of the Soviet Union. He wants them back. He believes that he has a right on behalf of the old Soviet Union or on behalf of modern Russia to put them all back together under Moscow's rule. This is a very, very precarious situation, and I think the West must understand the incredible ambitions that this man has.
And Joe, what do you think it's going to really take Ukraine? What's it going to take for Ukraine to win? I mean, is it conventional defenses and the resistance that even the ordinary Ukrainians are putting off? Is that going to be enough for Putin to actually surrender?
Well, I think the definition of winning is important to discuss. For Ukraine to win, they simply have to not lose. That is, they have to not surrender to Moscow or to Putin and keep the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Ukraine intact. They don't have to, obviously, they have no intention of invading Russia. And as far as Putin surrendering, I don't think that will ever happen in those terms. I think the West must make the cost of his invasion so onerous that he will decide to seek some kind of face-saving way out. I do want to mention that at the Nuremberg Tribunal for the Nazis back in the 1940s, they decided that there were three categories of crime, international crimes. One was a war of aggression, an unprovoked attack. The other is the crimes against humanity. And the third was crimes against civilians in the war itself. Putin has violated all three of those criteria. So in effect, Putin is a war criminal. And I hope the international community will begin investigating and taking the necessary procedural steps to bring him before a tribunal for his crimes.
And Carrie, Russian forces seized two small cities in southeastern Ukraine and the area around a nuclear power plant. What does that mean for the people there or other Russia-controlled areas?
Well, first off, it means that they're not doing as well as they thought they'd do. Two small cities on day 6 of this conflict. There has been immense loss of life, and it's a terrible situation. But there is enough indication that the Kremlin miscalculated its ability to take over some of its key strategic goals. The city of Sumy, which is a smaller city in northeastern Ukraine, is still fighting back, although it's been encircled. There's heavy fighting in Kharkiv and heavy bombing. The problem with the resilience and the resistance of the Ukrainians is that Vladimir Putin keeps moving then on to harder measures. There's been reports that he's been using something called vacuum bombing. Of course, he's using missiles. There's been reports of carpet bombing. So as much success, or as Joseph said, winning is actually not losing for the Ukrainians. And as much as they're not losing, then it seems that the attacks are leveled up. So to be very direct, what this means for the people living there now in areas where there are Russian troops is life is very, very difficult. And it is hard to see who really is a member of the military and who is a civilian in some situations, because the Ukrainians are working so closely together to defend their cities.
And Joe, now President Vladimir Putin, he caused a lot of concern a few days ago when he ordered his nuclear forces to be put on high alert during these tensions with the West. Do you think that the Russian president is willing to go to that level and use the nuclear weapons? How do you see the risk of this actually escalating into a nuclear war?
Well, it's not a new question, considering that for 50 years we had the Cold War, and the Soviet Union and the United States were at loggerheads. They both had nuclear weapons and missiles pointing at each other. So it's not a new question for Putin. The question is he a new type of Russian leader who will actually take such a drastic step as to use nuclear weapons? I think not, but I think he believes that threatening to do so gives him additional leverage over the West. And again, he's not the first one to use that tactic either. Xi Jinping of China has a couple of times mentioned the possibility of nuclear war if he doesn't get his way on Taiwan and the South China Sea. But Putin is certainly pressing things to the limit, and I think the cost must be increased on his activities so that he decides that they're not worth the candle.
And Carrie, now there's a lot of concern in the international community that the humanitarian crisis is that it could turn out to be disastrous. And well, the armed violence is already, of course, causing human suffering, civilian casualties, damage to infrastructure, as we saw in large-scale displacement, with 500,000 Ukrainians already having fled the country. What kind of assistance is needed for Ukrainians both inside and outside the country right now?
Well, let's talk about what's going on outside the country right now. Ukraine's neighbors, Poland, Slovakia, Romania, Moldova, Hungary, they are supporting with formal government-supported and private initiatives people as soon as they get across the border. Now, there are problems on the Ukrainian side simply because of the amount of people that you mentioned which are coming over. And there are priorities. Women and children are being led over first. Men between the ages of 18 and 60 are not, Ukrainian men are not being allowed to leave the country so they can defend the country. And once someone actually makes it outside of the country, there is a support system that is intact now. Poland and Germany have offered Ukrainian refugees free train tickets. These are important gestures. But the people inside are faced with the challenges. And what needs to be done to make their lives easier? Of course, the obvious answer is the Kremlin needs to stop bombing Ukraine, but they are going to be in need of food, water, temporary shelter. They're going to be in need of psychological services. And there's basic things like generators, internet service. And at some point, the infrastructure that has been destroyed is going to need to be replaced at a very high cost. And it's important that plans start being made right away so Ukraine can bounce back once this conflict ends.
And Joe, top aides to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks that lasted almost 5 hours, apparently. It seems that they discussed a possible ceasefire, although both sides appear to show different sort of reactions or reactions after their talks. What do you think Russia is asking of Ukraine, and do you think there still could be a diplomatic way out?
Well, I think what Russia is asking for is complete surrender. Just as they demanded that from NATO, they wanted a guarantee that we would never allow Ukraine or Georgia or any other country to join NATO. So they're seeking, all of the objectives that Putin has laid out in the past. I think, as I said before, that the costs to Putin must be increased dramatically. And I think one important factor here is, and our other guest may know the answer to this, is what kind of information are the Russian people receiving about what is going on? Do they know about the casualties among their own forces? I think the West needs to get that information into the Russian people. They're already protesting. They don't want this war. And between that public protest and the oligarchs who are unhappy with the sanctions, I think there are enough forces in Russia that are building, and we ought to support them, to get rid of Putin once and for all, and to have the international community bring him before a war crimes tribunal.
And Carrie, well, as the Ukrainian Prime Minister said, the Russian leadership does not understand that this is, that Ukraine is, that the people of Ukraine are also fighting alongside the armed forces of Ukraine. And well, then how should the global community really show their support by standing with them, and how should they express their support for the Ukrainian people's resistance?
This ties into what Joseph mentioned a moment ago about how much the Russian citizens really know about what's happening in Ukraine. And this ties in because of social media and what not only the Ukrainian citizens can do, but the rest of us can do around the world by constantly amplifying the message, the truth coming out of Ukraine, by showing the pictures about what is happening. The bombing of the main square in Kharkiv, there was no reason for that. And there have been reports on social media throughout Ukraine being shared of prisoners of war saying that Russian prisoners of war being captured saying, I didn't know that I wasn't on a maneuver, or my commander told me that I would be welcomed as a liberator, and they're shocked that they're not being welcomed into Ukraine. So that's one of the first things. And this ties into the whole aspect of hybrid war and how Russia has been conducting it against Ukraine since the annexation of Crimea in 2014. But the Ukrainian people have become savvy to this and have learned how to fight back.
I don't hear anything. I don't know whether I've entirely lost my connection.
Right, so a bit of confusion there, but yes, please continue,
That's
Carrie.
okay. And that's just the point I wanted to make. The other three things that need to be mentioned that's unprecedented right now is economically, the global community has very much jumped in with sanctions and shown solidarity at a level that hasn't been seen. And for the first time, the European Union is actually going to be financing weapons that they'll deliver to another country. The only problem is, and this needs to be mentioned, and although Ukraine is not a member of NATO, closing the airspace over Ukraine would save Ukrainian lives right now.
And well, this is where we'll have to leave it today as we're out of time. That was Carrie Odderman, political scientist and political communications strategist, and Joseph Bosco, former China country director for the Secretary of Defense in the US and also opinion contributor to The Hill. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Nice to be with you.
An often overlooked side effect of the pandemic is all the waste generated from the tens of millions of face masks that are thrown away each day in South Korea alone. Looking to challenge this head-on, a local government south of Seoul has launched a project to collect masks and turn them into plastic raw materials. Lee Eun-jin has the story.
The face masks that we wear to protect ourselves against COVID-19 becomes waste at the end of the day. South Korea alone throws away some 7.3 billion masks as waste each year. And one of the key mask materials, polypropylene, is a potential threat to the environment. Polypropylene is a type of plastic that's been reported to take over 450 years to completely decompose in nature, and it even releases toxins in the process, meaning it is not biodegradable. In the city of Yongin, the local government has launched a trial run of a project to collect these waste masks by setting up a special box at this apartment complex.
We used to throw away used masks in general waste bags, but now we come here, even if this bin is a little out of the way.
It is crucial to remove the metal nose strips when throwing masks away. Then, a nearby collection company comes regularly to pick up the gathered masks. Each mask contains roughly 3 grams of polypropylene. This is gathered and turned into plastic chairs or pet supplies.
We use antiviral fabric to collect the masks, which blocks the spread of germs and viruses. We're making full efforts to prevent the spread of the virus when collecting and transporting the masks.
We ask for your active participation as recycling waste masks is a step towards reducing household waste as well as responding to environmental pollution.
Yongin City is currently running a trial of this project at one apartment complex, but it plans to expand these waste mask collection bins to all of its residential complexes. 이은진, Arirang News.
And now for a look at news from around the world, we have Lee Seung-jae joining us from our Arirang newsroom. Good morning.
Good morning to you guys.
Now, Seung-jae, firefighters in Chile have been fighting wildfires all across that country.
That's right. So we're looking at firefighters having been battling back blazes in Valparaiso, specifically on Monday going into Tuesday, with the region now on red alert over raging wildfires. Now, local officials say strong winds in the area are fueling the movement of the fires, which are consuming hundreds of hectares of land. Now, the geographical location of the fires is also concerning, as they could threaten electrical substations, roads, and many towns in the area. Now, helicopters and airplanes have been working alongside 18 brigades to extinguish the wildfires before they reach some of the more populated areas. Now, in recent weeks, firefighters across the country have been struggling to manage wildfire amid an intense heat wave. Now, a national conference in Burkina Faso has adopted a charter that will allow the military junta that seized power in the West African state in January to lead a 3-year transition. The charter was later signed by junta leader Henri Paul Damiba on Tuesday, and the commission that drafted the transitional charter had initially proposed a 2.5-year transition, saying the junta called for around 2 years to stabilize the country and organize elections. Now, the January coup was the 4th in the West Africa region in 18 months, as Burkina Faso was suspended from the Economic Community of West African States and the African Union. Now, the U.S. has also halted nearly $160 million in aid. Now, the United States returned a total of 9 trafficked antiquities to Jordan during an official ceremony in Amman on Tuesday. The artifacts were illegally smuggled from Jordan and obtained by an antiquities collector in the U.S. before being recovered by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Now, among the return items include Neolithic stone animal figurines, a stone altar, tombstones, a human figurine, and a bronze pitcher. Now, during the ceremony, Jordan's Minister of Tourism and Antiquities stressed the deep U.S.-Jordanian relations, mainly in combating trafficking of cultural property. And finally, just over a week after testing positive for COVID-19, Queen Elizabeth II felt well enough to take part in 2 virtual audiences on Tuesday, following a number of cancellations of similar events last week. The 95-year-old was reported to have been suffering mild cold-like symptoms, and despite canceling some events, she continued with light duties. Now, during her video link from Windsor Castle, she spoke with incoming ambassadors from Andorra and Chad, while the ambassadors attended the virtual session at Buckingham Palace. Now, Buckingham Palace noted that it would not be giving a running commentary on the condition of the Queen after her infection.
Good morning. Unlike the very mild temperatures we had over the holiday, morning temperatures have dropped below freezing again in the capital to about 8 degrees lower than the same time yesterday, but highs will go up as high as yesterday. But eastern parts of the country continue to have dry air and strong winds will blow in through the afternoon. Air quality will be normal to good nationwide, then toxic smog will blow in tonight, boosting dust levels in the capital and Chungcheongdo provinces. Morning temperatures are colder than season norms under mostly sunny skies in most parts. Then highs will be 1 to 3 degrees lower this afternoon, but Daegu and Gyeongju will still go up to 14 degrees this afternoon. The capital and west of Gangwon-do province is forecast to see either rain or snow on Friday. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that's all we have for now. Mark and I will be back for another edition of New Day at Arirang at 8 a.m. Korea time on Thursday. And I'm Kim Mo-gyan.
You got there in the end, Morgan. I'm Mark Broom. Have a wonderful rest of the day. And thank you, as always, for joining us. We'll be back, as Morgan said, same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.